Arsenal 2, Tottenham Hotspur 0. Oh, it was a glorious weekend, kids. And it leaves Arsenal 8 points clear at the top of the Premier League table. Ho-ho-ho. And it leaves us with 2 questions. 1, what do we think of Tottenham? And 2, would it be as cold as it is today if Ragnvald Knaphövde had taken the customary hostages into Västergötland during his Eriksgata in 1126? Well, I'm going to tackle that one and talk about some other compelling stuff on the other side. Hello, you're listening to the John Huff Podcast. Oh, yay. So what happened was they had a thing. Literally, they had a thing. There used to be a thing called a thing. If you look at the history of Germanic tribes, of Germanic cultures, which includes your Scandinavians, if you go back far enough, all right? Your Vikings, your Swedish people, etc., your Norwegians, Martin Odegaard with a magnificent shot into the bottom corner for Arsenal on the weekend. They had a thing. What was a thing? A thing, literally called a thing, was a gathering of the people, all right? So at a designated place, on designated times, or at designated times, in the medieval world, people would gather. The townsfolk, the countryside folk, the locals would gather at a designated spot, and they would have a thing. And the thing was basically a community gathering. And so they would share the news of the day. They might talk over some legal disputes. They might settle some problems. You know, the Vikings had kind of a customary cultural rule that said if there was a dispute between people, you basically had to fight it out. Feuding was a way of solving problems for the Vikings. And they were sworn culturally to take vengeance on behalf of any of their family members who had been killed or mutilated. So you might get together at the thing and fight whoever had killed your family member, that kind of thing. But other things were court sessions, or they might gather to trade stuff, or just have a party. A thing, literally called a thing, was a cultural community event held regularly at the usual spot, and each clan or tribe or whatever would have a lawmaker, and the lawmaker would preside over the thing, and they would deal with the legal stuff, and the lawmaker would make decisions about things. And then I think they'd throw up the market stalls and have a good time and dance around the fire, and who knows what else might happen at the thing. Feel like Motley Crue used to have things at their shared apartment on the Sunset Strip. People used to literally have a thing. They called it a thing. Now, what we're doing here is the latest edition of the This Episode in History segment. And I'm already fudging it, all right? I'm fudging it in 2 ways. Because this is episode number 126, I'm supposed to pull some history from the year 126. Didn't find anything worth talking about, so I jumped ahead a millennium to the year 1126, and I discovered this story of King Ragnvald Knaphövde of Sweden. And that's a fudge too, because I'm saying it was 1126 because I read that the events I'm about to describe happened in 1126. Some people dispute that. Say it might have been 1130, might have been 1127, I don't know. For the sake of our podcast here today, we're going to put Ragnvald in 1126 attending a thing. that will prove to be fatal for your new King of Sweden. So what used to happen back in the day, we're talking medieval times here, at least in Sweden, if you can believe it, the king would be elected. The King of Sweden, what we know now as Sweden, which was a collection of provinces and probably little kingdoms and territories and whatever, this perhaps loosely unified collection of peoples and places. In the province of Uppland, they would elect a king. All right? Elect, kids. They would elect. How civilized. A king. And there would be no disputing whether the election was rigged by the Russians, although it probably was. So they would elect the king. And then what the king would do is he would go on this ceremonial kind of pilgrimage or voyage that they called an Eriksgata. And what that meant was that he would go from province to province to province and meet with the people, province to province to province, and they would confirm or express their acceptance of said king and express their fealty to said king. And he would do that at a series of things. The king is coming, or someone proclaiming to be the king is coming. We better have a thing. Check this cat out, see if we're down or not, right? And the history of this is really freaking muddy. I've spent quite a lot of time trying to sort out the particulars of this Eriksgata, but it was a long journey through several provinces of this newly elected king just to make sure everybody knew who he was and everybody was on board, okay? Now this is where the parts get a little bit weird, because it was tradition, I think, for in each province, hostages to be taken by the king, or hostages to be offered to the king in each province. And these people would be usually members of highly placed prominent families. So the king would come into your territory, and I guess as a gesture of goodwill or a gesture of welcome, these highly placed people, 4, 5, 6 of them, I'm not even sure, would be placed into the king's custody. And that would have a number of practical and symbolic effects. So, A, the king, to a certain extent, provides himself a little bit of security because he has in his entourage members of prominent regional families. So if stuff goes down, the king can maybe lop one of their heads off. Maybe, back off the power brokers in the area. Like, I got your kids here. If you start anything, I'm going to take them out. You know what I mean? Kind of a mutually assured destruction sort of a thing. That's one theory. Another theory is that you would gather up hostages from prominent families because they would simply know the territory. All right, this king may never have been to this part of the country before. And so, I don't know where I'm going. We need guides. And so they would collect these people who would be guides for them. Or these people would be respected and therefore trusted members of the regional community, and they would simply vouch for him. It's like, okay, here's me. You guys know me and my family. You can trust me. This is the king. I've been hanging out with him. He's cool. Trust me, he is who he says he is. And you can believe me on this. And so therefore the king would be allowed passage into the territory because these cats were vouching for him, right? So there's a number of possible explanations for these hostages. And then the idea was that the king would show up at the thing with the hostages. This is a mutual pact of respect where we will give you the sons of our prominent families as a gesture of our goodwill and of our faith. And then at the end of all this, you'll give them back. You will pardon them. You will release them to us as your gesture of good faith. And the idea was the king comes in and accepts these hostages, right? And as kind of a show of respect. So, feels like I need to play this game because I respect this province and I acknowledge the power and prominence of this province. So I will play the game with you because I want you on my side. And I feel as though I need to do this to accept the hostages, to release the hostages, to show my deference and respect to you and your peoples. So the legend says Ragnvald Knaphövde is elected King of Sweden in Uppland and embarks, according to some reckonings, in 1126, on his Eriksgata through the various provinces of Sweden, right? The same old thing. For some reason, he comes to the province of Västergötland and doesn't accept or doesn't take the hostages. Now, this part of the country, the prominent tribe or the prominent peoples are the Geats. I'm not making this up, man. The Geats. Geats by our reckoning, all right? And so Ragnvald, that's Ragnvald, Knaphövde, I think I'm pronouncing that about half right, shows up in Västergötland and either doesn't accept the hostages or doesn't take the hostages. However that worked, I'm not sure how that worked. It's very fuzzy. It's 1,000 years ago. We didn't have the internet then. We didn't have Google. We didn't have ChatGPT. Although I should have asked ChatGPT how this works and it would have told me. Regardless, Ragnvald shows up on his Eriksgata, on his trip through Sweden, either doesn't take or doesn't accept the hostages, and goes wandering in. Sign of massive disrespect to the Geats, who look at this, and one of two things happened. He either showed up at the thing unannounced and therefore unrecognized, and as what Iron Maiden might have called a stranger in a strange land, and the Geats did not like this stranger in a strange land showing up proclaiming to be the king, or they recognized him as the king and saw that he did not accept or did not take the hostages, and therefore took that as an expression on his part that he doesn't need to play the game with these people because these people are not worthy of his respect or deference, and they are not a threat to him. So let's dispense with all this crap, and you just swear your fealty to me and I'll move on. It was considered, it's thought, a slap in the face to the Geats that the new king did not see them as worthy of the whole hostage game. Either way, whether he was simply not recognized and was seen as a threatening stranger, or whether he just flat out dissed him by not playing the game, the Geats execute the king. Ragnvald Knaphövde, whose last name apparently is a reference to having a large head, or perhaps being large-headed, aka stupid. Sign of disrespect, possibly, I don't know. The suggestion was that this cat was very arrogant, very prideful, bit of a dick, man, and rolled into this territory, did not play the game. The Geats did not dig on that performance, and killed the dude. You want to talk about speaking truth to power, kids? And apparently, this happened in 1126 AD, and that makes it this episode of history, but it begs further questions. As I said in the intro, would it be as cold as it is today if Ragnvald had just played the freaking game? What are you talking about, man? Where are you going with this? Well, most of us in the world operate on the Celsius scale. All apologies to our American listeners. We know you're into your Fahrenheit. Good for you. The rest of the world we deal in the Celsius scale, which is based on the work of Swedish astronomer and mathematician Anders Celsius. Celsius worked on this notion of, in his reckoning, 100 degrees being the freezing point of water and 0 degrees being the boiling point of water at 1 atm, or standard atmospheric pressure. Eventually, they came along and flipped that so that 0 is the freezing point of water and 100 is the boiling point of water, 100 degrees Celsius. And that became the accepted scale, but it was named after Anders Celsius, the Swedish astronomer and mathematician. Would there have been an Anders Celsius if Ragnvald had simply played the game and been allowed to have his kingdom and be the king, and who knows what policies he may have enacted, who knows what wars he may have fought, who knows what he may have done, which may have altered the course of Swedish life, and therefore the ancestors of Mr. Celsius may not have connected, might have been killed in battle. Who knows, man? There may have been no Anders Celsius. And then what? There might not have been a Sarah McDougal, guest on this program. There might not have been a Bjorn Borg, and therefore no foil for the great John McEnroe. Borg, 5 Wimbledon titles in a row, might not have happened had Ragnvald just taken the hostages. Would the Colorado Avalanche have developed the dynasty they developed in the 90s, early 2000s, spearheaded by Mr. Peter Forsberg? Would there have been a Lindros trade? Would all of that have happened had Ragnvald Knaphövde just taken the hostages? We'll never know. We'll never know. This is what's on my mind over the past week as I'm mucking about putting this podcast together. What would have happened? What if he had just taken the hostages, played the game, and moved on peacefully to the next province? Who's to say? Who's to say? This is podcasting at its finest, is it not? I don't even want to mention what Rocky IV might have been without Dolph Lundgren. What would we do without Sweden? Sit down right now. Would there be Ghost? Would there be Ghost? This is what history does, kids. You see how fragile are those lines. You know, you look at historical events, and it's remarkable. It is remarkable how much of a role sheer chance plays in the unfolding epic that is human history. Not even human history. If a massive comet does not slam somewhere into the earth, causing a dust cloud that eventually wipes out the dinosaurs and most life on Earth, how is the world different now? I mean, Jurassic Park has reimagined what life might be, but it's like these cosmic chances happen. Just if that comet, goes a few miles to the left, misses Earth entirely, or crashes into an utterly different place, is the entire trajectory of history changed? Are we listening right now? You sit back and you think of the fragility of our timelines. How much chance plays such a huge role in pivotal events like World War II. There was a moment, this is documented, okay, First World War. There was a moment when Herr Hitler himself, in the frontline trenches, there was a British soldier who had Herr Hitler, this is documented, I'm not making this up either, in direct sight of his rifle, well within range, an easy shot to take out who was at that point in time just another anonymous German soldier. And this English soldier opted not to shoot, opted to let him go free. How much of our history is influenced by that simple chance? He takes that shot, maybe there's no Hitler. he takes that shot, maybe there's no World War II, maybe there's no Holocaust, maybe there's far less strife in the Middle East, maybe there's less. Who's to say about that one fateful shot taken or not taken? And when I think of this Ragnvald story, which might not even be true, by the way, might be folklore for all we know, but you begin to think about how simple decisions or how simple fate, how much destiny turns on simple decisions and simple fate. It's overwhelming when you think about it, and if you try to go too far down the rabbit hole, there's amazing alternate histories that exist that are really, really interesting to think about. Or one shot that misses or doesn't. And I think about Ragnvald Knaphövde, and it's kind of fun. It's kind of a fun notion to think maybe we wouldn't have Ghost today if the ancestors of Tobias Forge had not gotten together because of something that Ragnvald Knaphövde may or may not have done. I don't know if you're interested in that weird arcane history stuff. I kind of am, and so I talked about it, but I don't know if you are. So if you're not, I apologize. And if you hung, thank you. We'll get into something just as freaking weird, but perhaps more up your alley right now. I was introduced to a band this week, and I'm still, like, you gotta sit down when you listen to this band, or after you listen to this band, and you sit down and you think, what just happened? What was that? The band was introduced to me by our old friend Ken the Zen. They are called High Castle Teleorkestra. What is High Castle Teleorkestra? Okay, on a practical level, this band is, shall we say, avant-garde. It is a collection of musicians, none of which live in the same place. There's like a few of them scattered throughout America. There's a person in Australia, somebody in France, and they collaborated on this really bizarre, avant-garde is the right word, musical project that collectively they called High Castle Teleorkestra. Now, where are my science fiction listeners out there? Because right away you'll recognize High Castle. High Castle, the man in the High Castle, being the work of a prominent sci-fi author called Philip K. Dick. Everybody knows Philip K. Dick was one of the guys, like one of the godfathers, the Shakespeare, they call him, of science fiction. And one of his books, The Man in the High Castle, became a very popular Amazon series. It was an alternate history, wherein the aforementioned Hitler, who was not killed on that First World War battlefield, not only in that moment, but in any of the other moments that he might have been blown up, like so many hundreds of thousands of others were, the Nazis and the Axis powers, Italy, Germany, Japan, win World War II in The Man in the High Castle. And they take over America. And so that book and subsequent Amazon series set in America with the Axis powers in charge. All right, Philip K. Dick did a lot of writing about aliens, dystopian stuff. I've not read much Dick. I'm not a big sci-fi guy, but he's written tons and tons of stuff. And you've experienced some of his work, even if you didn't know it. If you've seen Blade Runner, that is based on a story of his called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And if you have watched Total Recall with Arnold, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale was a story of Philip K. Dick's upon which that was based. Minority Report, Tom Cruise movie, also based on Philip K. Dick's work. And so this first album by High Castle Teleorkestra is called The Egg That Never Opened. I don't know, man. The Egg That Never Opened. And apparently this is a mostly musical, not a lot of vocals, mostly musical interpretation or retelling of a Philip K. Dick novel called Radio Free Albemuth. I think that's how you pronounce it, which is a book that Dick was writing after some weird, perhaps drug-induced stuff, a connection with God, some hallucinations. I'm not sure. I think Dick attempted to, I'm going to have to put the censorship label on this episode. Apparently, he tried to express these experiences in a novel. Didn't really work for him, and so he abandoned it. But after his death, it was picked up and published by whoever was in control of his estate. And so we have this abandoned novel by Philip K. Dick, which became, like, I think they made a movie out of it, whatever. And so these cats in High Castle Teleorkestra took the narrative of that book and attempted to recreate it musically. And so what you get with this band, according to their own bio, is inscrutable metric modulations, check. Eclectic cadence, check. Vaudeville grindcore, and Romanian folk metal. In my parlance, this is some of the weirdest stuff I've ever heard in my freaking life, man. This album called The Egg That Never Opened. And I gotta be honest, the first song came on, and it's called The Egg That Never Opened, the title track from The Egg That Never Opened. And I'm listening to it, and I laughed out loud. I laughed out loud because it's psychotic. I can't even, there's accordion. It's got this wailing accordion solo over just this weird bed of sounds. And then all of a sudden there's just this huge thrash metal riff just comes in and then stops. And then some strings, and then some weird eclectic jazz chording. And then more accordion, and then a thrash riff, and then some heavy drums, and then just some weird sounds. This is, to put it lightly, we'll call it prog. This is wild, weird, avant-garde music. And so you listen to The Egg That Never Opened. Then you get into this next song called Ich Bin's, German, I ams, ICH space, BIN apostrophe S. Ich bin is I am. Ich bin's, I don't know. And it's not like there's lyrics to tell us. But maybe there's something in the actual novel. I've not read the novel. Maybe there's something called that in Philip K. Dick's book. I don't know. And it's just weird. A lot of accordion happening here. And it'll be like a German kind of Oktoberfest sound, and then more heavy metal guitars for just like a split second. Then into more accordion. It just keeps going. And this goes on for a whole album. Then once in a while, a voice comes in, starts singing something, or be something like Gregorian almost, it feels like to me. And then some more accordions. And this goes on for a full dang record, man. And it is apparently based on this Philip K. Dick novel. And Ken the Zen sent it to me because he found it on a list of like the top records, the top albums from whatever year, 2020, 2021, 2022, actually, now that I checked my notes. High Castle Teleorkestra, The Egg That Never Opened. If you're out there right now and you are looking for something utterly different, something utterly bizarre, something as inscrutable as they promise it is, this is the record for you, man. I suggest, not that I am endorsing drug use. You might not even need drugs for this. This may be a drug all on its own. But I suspect, with the help of mushrooms, maybe even some stiff weed, this record might take you to another dimension, man, which I think is what Philip K. Dick had in mind. Because his novel was based on this sort of weird interdimensional experiences he was happening, however he was coming to them, man. His experiences of God. However he got there. And this album is, without question, the strangest stuff I've heard in a long time. But then you listen to it, and it's kind of a marvel, actually, because there's some wild musicianship happening here. And as far as I can tell, they were not in the same room when they made this, all right? They are spaced all over the world, the members of this band. There's 6 of them. And so I'm assuming that they're flying in all of their parts. Like, I don't know how. I'd like to know. I don't know how they collaborated this, because it is not structurally such that you can, like, send the drum tracks in. They don't make any freaking sense. It's chaos, man. It's like acid jazz and metal and pa music and polka all jammed into a mish together, and it doesn't make sense. Like, what are the charts for this? What sense does it? It doesn't make sense. So how did they make it? Because, as weird as it is, there are very obviously parts. There are very obviously sections to this. I mean, this has been written. And so the parts come in, like the thrash guitar comes in with drums underneath it and then fades out. And it's like, how did they structure this? How did they put this together if they were not all in the same room? Like, did they do it via Zoom? And so from that perspective, this becomes actually quite a compelling thing to listen to. I've only made it through the whole album one time. That was a trip, man. That was not easy to do. But I've listened to a couple of the tracks multiple times. So you might consider Ishbins. You might consider Placentia. I think that was... Favorite is not the right word. Placentia might be one of the ones that made the most musical sense to me. Sense in the sense that I could recognize things were happening. It wasn't just a cacophony of noise. Like, I could understand from a musical perspective that there were actually parts. If you're an AC/DC fan, if you were a fan of straight up rock and roll, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge, guitar solo, double chorus out. If that's your game, High Castle Teleorkestra is going to be a little weird to you, man. But if you're into, I don't know what, recordings of the sounds of cymbals being dropped down staircases, this stuff might get you, man. And I'm not saying it's not good. This is not me making fun, because in a bizarre way, I think this is a real accomplishment. It's not really my bag. I'm not into this sort of weird... I'm into arcane history. I'm not super into arcane music. But I find this really compelling. And if you're looking for something that is way, way different than almost anything you've ever heard before, this is the stuff, man. And I actually think some of it's kind of cool. I don't think it'll be on any of my... Apart from the podcast playlist, I don't imagine I'll be putting it down to tap my toes. But The Egg That Never Opened by High Castle Teleorkestra, it might be genius. Or it might be a really elaborate gag. I'm not sure which. It's brilliant, or they're having a laugh at our expense. I'm not sure. The production is really great, so I think they took it seriously. So if you're looking for something utterly different, High Castle Teleorkestra, The Egg That Never Opened, check that out. And at this moment, I'm going to drop in the Patreon plug, okay? Yes, there is a Patreon page for this podcast. It is patreon.com/JohnHuffPodcast. And there, for the low membership price of $5 a month, you can support the program. I know this particular episode's just about as inscrutable as the High Castle Teleorkestra record. Having said that, if you're getting something from it, if you're getting something from the other episodes that I've released that are a little bit less weird, if you're getting inspiration, if you are getting education, if you are learning about new music, if you are just simply enjoying a friendly voice on the airwaves once a week, warms your cockles, gives you some comfort, please do consider supporting me on Patreon. It helps me just cover some of the expenses of this show, and it makes it so you don't have to listen to ads, because I do not want to run ads here. I do not want to subject you to ads. I like Patreon because it is voluntary. Patreon.com/JohnHuffPodcast. If that's not your bag, that's cool. If you can't afford it, if you just don't want to do it, the podcast will remain free and accessible wherever you enjoy fine podcasts. That's okay. You can help me by sharing these episodes. You can help me by telling a friend. You can help me by following on the socials, John Huff Podcast on Instagram, John Huff Podcast on Facebook, John Huff Podcast on your TikTok, where I will very soon be doing lip sync videos in my bikini top. Support me on the socials. share the episodes, ratings and reviews. I know I ask every week, but they really do help. So please consider a rating and review on your preferred podcast platform, preferably a positive one. And again, the Patreon is patreon.com/JohnHuffPodcast. Now, last week I talked about the cover of Megadeth's Youthanasia album and tied that into a little road story. And I had some interesting feedback on that. Thank you very much. I didn't actually talk much about the Youthanasia record. And if we're talking about music that you may not have listened to, this is one you should probably check out, all right? Now, Megadeth, of course, has the reputation of being a thrash metal band, a pioneering thrash metal band. And some of you may hear that genre and think, not my bag, man. I'm not really into that stuff. Youthanasia is not a thrash record. I can remember when this album came out, the first single, the big single, was Train of Consequences. Interesting song, a really kind of percussive guitar riff. Not a lot of melody in the guitar riff, but a lot of percussion, a lot of picking happening. Really freaking cool. And so when the record came out, Megadeth was going to be on Letterman, right? Oh yeah, kids. Megadeth was going to be on Letterman. And they made this huge evil thing out of it. So Dave would be like, tonight on the show, kids, Megadeth is here. And then there'd be like the logo would flash into the screen and there'd be like evil music and whatever. As though some insane, awful death metal band that was genuinely evil was about to appear on the program. There is some wonderful footage from, 8, 9, 7 years ago of Ghost appearing on, I want to say Colbert. I think it was Colbert. And they played Circe. And during the performance, Papa performed an exorcism on an audience member. I mean, this was heavy duty pantomime evil, all right? This was genuine theater. 10 or 15, 20 years, I guess, before that, along comes Megadeth to the Letterman show, and Dave's like, Megadeth is here, and then it would be all spooky and evil. Megadeth has never been spooky and evil, but I guess the connotation was heavy metal band, spooky and evil. Black Sabbath must be here, you know what I mean? It's just Megadeth. They're a heavy metal band, and that record is not a thrash record at all. I mean, thrash is associated with those really fast, chugging kind of guitar riffs and the really fast drumming, right? Super duper speed, and I love thrash for that. Love thrash for the speed and intensity, but Youthanasia, not a thrash record. And Countdown to Extinction, not a thrash record, all right? This is what we talked about before. This was the commercial phase of those bands. Metallica, Black Album, Load, Reload, Megadeth, Countdown to Extinction, Youthanasia, very commercial, granted metal records, but very commercial, right? So Train of Consequences is practically a pop song. By Megadeth standards, all right? If some other bands had done Train of Consequences, they'd be like, whoa! But not a thrash song at all. And not even one of my favorite songs on the record, I don't think. It's cool, but I think there are better tunes. The opening song, Reckoning Day, great. Just a great. I mean, if you listen to a lot of Megadeth records, especially records that have come since then, the riffs just keep getting more and more blinding and technical because Mustaine is a brilliant guitarist, all right? And everybody he's had come through that band, the Legions, I think I'm the only drummer who hasn't played in Megadeth. Vinny freaking Colaiuta recorded a Megadeth record. The riffs just get more and more technical, more and more challenging, more and more difficult, and they're fabulous. I mean, Mustaine is a freaking genius of this genre, all right? But you go back to Youthanasia, things are a little bit more simple, a little more accessible, a little more commercial, and they groove like freaking crazy, man. Like Youthanasia is like a proto-groove metal record, almost. And I love the riff on Reckoning Day. It's freaking heavy, but it's not heavy such that it is discombobulating. A lot of thrash metal was so fast, you couldn't even keep up with it. This is not that. Really groovy stuff. Reckoning Day is a great freaking song. Then they had the song À tout le monde, which was kind of a hit. À tout le monde, where he sang the chorus in French. And it's dark, man. It's about a person committing suicide. These are the last words I'll ever speak, and they'll set me free. But this is practically a pop song, too. It's metal. It's not even really heavy metal. It's not air metal, certainly. But it ain't thrash. À tout le monde is great. And then there are just some tunes that groove so freaking hard. The Killing Road, Blood of Heroes. It's like you put this, I've talked, not for a long time, but I've talked in the past about You Must Move. Remember me talking about this, how certain songs will come on and the groove and the tempo and the beat and the riff are such that you just have to move. This record is full of tunes that just, this is a Megadeth record, and it's full of tunes that just make you move, make you want to just move, and you make the stank face because those grooves hit deep, man. And so you get a song like Blood of Heroes. Oh, man. Blood of Heroes, you have to move. Even if you're not a metal fan, you gotta move when you hear it. Just hits you right in the dancing shoes, man. And this record is full of riffs and licks that just make you move. And at the same time, full of hooks. That's not easy to do. It is not easy to be heavy and groovy and still have hooks. Like there are singable choruses, singable choruses on this record. Killing Road, Blood of Heroes, even À tout le monde, Elysian Fields. It's just an endless run of grooves that hit you and choruses you can sing along to. And one of the best choruses on the album, which is difficult to sing with a lot of conviction, is the chorus to Family Tree, because the song Family Tree is about child abuse. So, let me show you how I love you. It's our secret, you and me. Let me show you how I love you. It's the secret of the family tree. That is awful material. That is awful material. Doesn't mean it isn't real and it doesn't exist, but it's like, how do you dig into that chorus as a music fan and sing it with enthusiasm and devil horns, knowing what it's about? Cognitive dissonance, bit of a brain twister there, but what a chorus! What a chorus on Family Tree. Like it's just, it really, really straddles a line, that record, of being heavy and groovy and catchy and hitting on some dark, dark stuff, and yet at the same time being radio friendly. A lot going on there, and Youthanasia is largely overshadowed by Countdown to Extinction because Countdown had Symphony of Destruction on it. And that is that is Megadeth's Enter Sandman. I didn't even have to wait a minute for that title to come to my mind this week. Guess we're making progress. So if you have not listened to Youthanasia, beyond my story about it, do, okay? And I will put one or two of those tunes on the John Huff podcast, referenced on the podcast 2023 playlist. That's where we're at, kids, 2023. One of those, and most certainly the song Victory. All right, now, I talked about Psychotron being my favorite deep cut from Countdown. My favorite deep cut from Youthanasia is the last song. It's called Victory. And it just smokes. It just freaking smokes. Again, that groove, but it's a bit faster. It's a bit more up-tempo. Just a great heavy metal tune. And it's kind of brilliant because the song is about Mustaine's experience with drugs, of which he has much, and getting off the drugs. And the lyrics to the song contain titles of other Megadeth songs. So it's just a whole litany of lyrics made up of the titles of other Megadeth songs. Par exemple, verse 2. Came anarchy to set the world afire, pain of hook and mouth in my darkest hour, corruption of the world, peace sells, nobody's buying, ignorant religion, holy wars, and the dying, tornado nearly got me by the skin of my teeth, this was my life for closure of my dreams. May the past rust in peace in Hangar 18 and Countdown to Extinction just be a bad dream, Lucretia said. Not even close. This is Mustaine's favorite part. Not even close to overdose. Chorus. Had fingers in my eyes, had needles in my veins, a knife right through my heart. I am a victory. Had fingers in my eyes, had needles in my veins, a knife right through my heart. I am a victory. What a great freaking song. If you listen to nothing else from that record, listen to Victory. It's a killer deep cut. Love that freaking song. Love this record. I have not contemplated Youthanasia for quite some time. And going back to it, based on my discussion of album covers last week, it's been really fun to open that up again and listen, you know? Great, great record. You know, if your experience of Megadeth was Peace Sells But Who's Buying in the late 80s, because you saw it on the Power Hour, or you saw it on Headbangers Ball, and then you didn't pay much attention until you heard Symphony of Destruction on the radio, and then after that was over, you went away again. Go check out Youthanasia, because you missed a really great record. You missed a really cool freaking record, okay? Suddenly, we're sneaking up on an hour. I hope you have hung this far. I thank you if you did. I talked about some goofy stuff. Some goofy stuff and some weird music. I want to sign off this episode with a resource for all of you anxiety people out there, okay? I don't know about you. The anxiety that I have struggled with for the past few years has been rearing its head again lately. It sent me in search of resources to help cope with that. And one of the things I found, which may be useful to you as well, is the Anxiety RX podcast. This is a podcast hosted by Dr. Russell Kennedy, medical doctor, neuroscientist, and for nearly 30 dang years, a sufferer of crippling anxiety. And he's got a lot of insight on what anxiety is. He doesn't even use the term anxiety. He talks about being in a state of alarm. This feeling of anxiety coming over you is not that, he said, it is an alarm. And it is driven in most cases, he theorizes, by childhood experiences that remain in the body as physical things. This is a compelling notion of past trauma having an energetic signature, a physical energy that is not processed through the body and gets locked in there. And in a lot of cases, if you suffer from anxiety, you will feel it in a specific part of your body. Feel mine in my chest. Other people may feel it in the throat or the shoulders, solar plexus, whatever. This is a compelling notion that it is actually a physical thing. And it is a physical thing inspired, triggered by unresolved childhood stuff, usually, perhaps other things. And he just has a different approach to treating anxiety, not from the head, mind, or thought level, but from the emotional level, because that's what it is, an emotional experience. And so his notion is you can't think your way through anxiety. You must feel your way through it. And so his podcast, the Anxiety RX podcast, talks a lot about approaching anxiety from this different perspective. They're short episodes, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, just full of interesting ways to reframe anxiety and to cope with it and ultimately heal it. So if you are a person who is struggling with anxiety these days, January is traditionally a bad month for that sort of thing. Post-Christmas come down. There hasn't, until the last couple of days, been a lot of sunshine, certainly around Ontario. So if you are struggling with anxiety these days and you're not quite sure what to do or how to cope, check out the Anxiety RX podcast. Sometimes just hearing a soothing voice will help. For me, it's been useful to be distracted. I mean, it's easy to catastrophize. You find yourself in that state of anxious alarm, and you begin to catastrophize all of your greatest fears happening, and maybe they're imminent and you can't control them, and that just snowballs things. It can be helpful just to have your mind distracted. It's one of the reasons I continue to do this show, kids. You know, when I talk about on the Patreon plug, I talk about if it's nice to just hear a friendly voice once a week. This is what I'm talking about, all right? I mean, I use podcasts a lot as a distraction from that thinking. You know, you pull your mind away from the triggers, and the triggers tend to lessen in your body. This is a body thing, not BAWDY. I like body things too. So, you got my podcast if you just want a distraction and a friendly voice. But if you want some actual science, if you want some actual therapy, and you're not seeing a therapist yourself, the Anxiety RX podcast might be useful for you. Dr. Russell Kennedy, go check that out. Be curious to know what you think. Otherwise, I just simply hope you're doing well. I'm actually apologizing in retrospect for this episode. I know it was freaking weird, but that's what came up this week, and here we are. I hope you are well. Please do consider Patreon. Please do consider following me on the socials and sharing these episodes if you're getting something from them. I thank you sincerely to the people who have written to say that they do get something from these episodes and have encouraged me to continue. See if this episode inspires any of that or not. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you're well. Arsenal tops the table, so life can't be all that bad, can it? Gonna shutting up for now, except to say, hey kids, I'll check you later. Yeah. Had fingers in my eyes, had needles in my veins, a knife right through my heart. I am a victory. I don't know how Mustaine does that voice, but I freaking loved it, and I always have. Huh.